They kicked her door in at 2 a.m. for no reason at all. To them, a black woman living alone was suspicious enough. They planted drugs, mocked her, certain they were breaking an innocent person. But they made one fatal mistake. They didn't know the woman they had come to erase was the very FBI agent who had been silently investigating their crimes for the last 15 years. They hadn't come to arrest a criminal. They had just delivered themselves to justice. The smell woke her. It wasn't the familiar scent of morning coffee, nor the warm trace of wood that usually lingered in her neat apartment. It was the stench of cheap cigar smoke mixed with an aftershave that was far too strong. A strange, rough smell, seeping into a place that was supposed to belong only to her. Maya Lincoln opened her eyes. Darkness still covered the room, but at the foot of her bed stood a figure tall and solid, blocking the air itself. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Her heart did not race. Her breath did not quicken. 15 years on the job had taught her how to turn fear into focus. Every sense stretched tight, capturing details. The scrape of leather against the floor, the snap of fingers, the sudden slash of a flashlight cutting across her face. "Wake up, princess." The man's voice was hoarse, dripping with mockery. Maya sat up, the sheet falling to reveal a tank top and underwear. Her dark eyes didn't look at him like a cornered victim. She studied him instead, steady, cold, like a scientist examining a specimen. The door rattled. Another shadow filled the doorway, a gun in hand, quiet but crushing. "Where's your warrant?" Maya asked, her tone even, sharp as glass. A laugh answered, and a small plastic bag of white powder sparkled under the light. "This is my warrant." On the wall, her FBI jacket hung, the golden letters catching the light. But no one stopped to look. This wasn't a mistake. This was a cleansing, and they hadn't come to arrest her. They had come to erase her. The drawer slammed open. The sharp sound echoed through the apartment, a place usually known for its order and silence. Papers, receipts, and a few rare handwritten letters were scattered across the floor like dry leaves caught in a sudden storm. Miller wasn't searching. He was performing. Every move was too loud, too staged. Each slam, each shove looked like a rehearsal in a play where he was both director and leading man. O'Connell stood beside him, hunched like an old tree, adding to the act with heavy kicks against the closet door. They wanted chaos, a scene later rewritten into the report as evidence found in a criminal's home. Maya didn't rise. She didn't resist. Her dark eyes worked like a cold lens, recording every detail. Angles, speed, the placement of fingers on surfaces. Each yank of a drawer was a guilty signature. Each heavy breath is a confession. She glanced at the clock. 17 a.m. A number that might seem meaningless, yet it would live forever in the record of this night. Someone else was there. Someone who didn't fit this performance. Officer Diaz. A young face pale under the beam of her flashlight. Her hands trembled around it, her footsteps cautious as if testing the ground beneath her. Her gaze didn't stick to Miller or O'Connell. It kept slipping toward the FBI jacket hanging on the wall. The gold letters gleamed, burning against the thin layer of conscience she still had. Then too quickly, her eyes darted back to Maya, then away again like she was afraid of being caught. She didn't belong to this script. The thought shot through Maya's mind. Maybe Diaz was forced, maybe misled, or maybe she was Miller's single mistake. Maya narrowed her eyes. She didn't need a pen and paper. At 23, she'd memorized the entire U.S. Constitution just to challenge herself. And she knew, sometimes a single crack is enough to bring down a wall. Diaz could be that crack. Miller smiled. Not from joy, but the twisted satisfaction of a man convinced he held someone's fate in his hands. He pulled out a clear plastic bag filled with fine white powder. "Well, look what we have here," he drawled, stretching the words to sting Maya's ears. It was all theater. The move was too smooth, too neat, exposing the lie beneath it. Maya didn't speak. She only lifted the corner of her mouth. A thin smile, impossible to pin down. Was it contempt or challenge? Miller's jaw tightened. A man who lived off fear couldn't stand the sight of calm. Beside her wallet, her small notebook with the federal badge gleamed untouched. They had stepped past it. They hadn't dared touch it. Or worse, they had chosen to ignore it. Arrogance is the blindfold people tie over their own eyes. Her encrypted phone sat charging, its small light blinking faithfully. Inside, 15 years of cases evidenced the blood of the innocent. They didn't know. They couldn't know. Maya drew a slow breath. This game had only just begun. "I want to see the search warrant." Her words weren't loud or sharp, but they dropped like a stone into still water. The ripples reached everyone in the room. O'Connell's hands faltered for a beat, then pretended nothing happened. Miller smirked. Only the silence could not be denied. Noise complaints, sweetheart. Miller sneered, his crooked smile like an old scar. Noise complaints don't give you the right to break down my door and tear apart my home. United States Constitution. Fourth Amendment. Maya's tone was calm, steady, like a professor teaching a lecture to a classroom of law students. The room shifted. The noisy rhythm of searching lost its force. Miller raised his brow, hiding his irritation behind a mocking grin. But it wasn't enough to cover the truth. He had been dragged into territory he couldn't control. The law. The law is my only weapon, Maya thought. And I've been sharpening it all my life. She remembered nights buried in the law library, when the rest of the world slept and she devoured case law like water. She had trained each statute the way others trained muscle, so that now in this invaded apartment, her hand didn't shake. The door opened, bringing in another figure. Captain Davies. He didn't need to shout or posture. His presence alone shifted the air. Polished, silver hair neatly combed, eyes cold as steel dipped in ice water. We received a tip about drug trafficking, he said. The voice was smooth, unbroken, and practiced. Maya met his gaze. From who? And what evidence lets you break into my home at 2 a.m? The silence that followed wasn't clumsy. It was deliberate. The silence of men who believe they never have to answer because power has taken the place of language. Maya inhaled deeply. I want your badge numbers. All of you, O'Connell snapped. You don't have that right. He thought the words ended the matter. But then another voice rose. Small, trembling, but clear. That's not true. Citizens do have the right to know an officer's identity. All eyes turned. It was Diaz. The silence was different now. No longer arrogance. It was a crack. And through the crack, light slipped in. Maya heard the bite of cold metal against her wrists. The cuffs, like invisible hands, clamped tight without shaking. Each movement made them rattle, a reminder she was in their grasp. But her eyes didn't rest on Miller or Davies. They fixed on Diaz, not pleading, not begging. The look of someone who had seen too many young souls lose themselves for the price of one bowed head. The look went straight to the fragile conscience still trembling inside the rookie's chest. Maya said nothing. She only nodded once. Brief, but enough to deliver a message. Don't betray yourself. The air thickened. Diaz's quick, uneven breath was loud enough to hear. Maya closed her eyes for a second. An old memory surged. A different night. A different pair of eyes and a young life stolen by men wearing badges. She had been powerless then, and that powerlessness had carved itself into her bones, bringing her to this night. She opened her eyes again, locking them on Diaz. If you believe one small act of courage can change everything, hit like and subscribe, because what comes next will prove. Even in the darkest night, one spark can set fire to an entire forest of lies. They didn't know. Their greatest mistake wasn't breaking into this apartment. It was leaving Maya Lincoln alive. The patrol car roared through the empty night. Red lights flashed, cutting across the silent buildings like a knife slashing the dark. Inside, the air felt thick enough to touch. Maya sat in the back, her wrists cold and stiff inside the metal cuffs. The bars before her made her look like a criminal in a cage, but her mind was free. She used the foggy window as a mirror, studying Miller and O'Connell through their own reflections. O'Connell glanced back, eyes unfocused as if trying to read her. What do you really do for a living? He asked. Maya stayed silent. Her eyes didn't move. She let silence answer for her. Miller adjusted the rearview mirror, his mouth curling into a snake's grin. Let's see how long you can keep that poker face. He angled the mirror to look straight into her eyes. He wanted fear. He craved weakness. But all he saw was his own distorted face staring back from the still black of her gaze. He didn't understand. They never understood. O'Connell lowered his voice like he'd slipped. You think she's heard anything about the investigation? Miller snapped immediately. What investigation? The hesitation flashed, a crack in the wall. Maya tilted her head. Every word spilling from their mouths was a shard of glass, and she was gathering each one, careful not to cut herself, knowing how to turn broken pieces into a weapon. The police station rose under the sick yellow streetlight, a gray concrete block standing like a monument to rot. Maya watched it through the window, and for a heartbeat, she didn't see a government building. She saw a fortress, a place where justice was kept locked up, where truth was bent like heated metal. She'd heard of places like this all her career. But tonight she wasn't stepping in as an observer. She was being led like an offering to an altar of corrupted power. Miller's boot shoved her shoulder, making her stumble. Here, we're the law, he growled, his breath thick with cigarettes. Maya didn't answer. She didn't need to. Inside her, a cold sentence formed. No, you're just men wearing the costume of law. Neon light poured down on the tired faces of the night shift officers at the front desk. Miller slammed Maya against the counter like she was evidence. Possession of cocaine. He tossed out the words like stones into a dry well. I've been framed, Maya said, her voice calm, clear, as if stating a fact instead of pleading. A pause spread, eyes met. No one spoke, but no one fully believed Miller either. This voice didn't belong to a drug dealer. It carried weight, as if the Constitution itself stood behind every syllable. I have the right to make a phone call, she continued, locking eyes with the desk sergeant. Miller barked, forcing his tone to cover the slip in his own nerves. You'll call when I say so. That's a violation of my constitutional rights, Maya replied. Her voice didn't rise, didn't shake. Just one statement, sharp enough to pierce whatever conscience remained. They marched her through booking. Fingerprints. Mugshot. Every motion dragged out, like a ritual meant to humiliate. Maya allowed it, her face unmoved. They wanted fear. The only thing they would see was their own emptiness reflected back. When the sergeant reached her wallet, his hand froze. Miller! His voice sagged under surprise. Miller scowled. What now? The sergeant swallowed. She works for the feds. The air went heavy. O'Connell straightened. Miller leaned in, his face bent over the screen. Red letters burned across it. Special Agent Maya Lincoln, FBI Public Corruption Unit. Active investigation. Operation Blue Viper. Red. Blinding. Not light, but accusation. Miller sucked in a breath like swallowing a blade. O'Connell cursed. The room tilted, like the floor had cracked. Maya stood still, wrists still cuffed. In that silence, a current ran down her spine. Not triumph, confirmation. They had picked the wrong person, and wrong in a way that would burn down the very wall they leaned on. Then Davies appeared. Not disheveled, not hurried. He walked in like a man used to stepping through storms without a drop touching his suit. Polished face, smooth voice, he announced. There's been a mistake. She's an important federal witness. Needs protection. Protection. The word dripped sweet as honey, but Maya heard the hiss of a snake inside it. She knew at once. This wasn't salvation. This was a sentence wrapped in pretty paper. Take her somewhere safe. Davies paused deliberately, then added, Black Ridge. 2 words dropped like a stone. Black Ridge. The name alone could make even hardened men shiver. The infamous county facility where cameras broke at night, where inmates were reported to have taken their own lives with ropes no one knew existed. In Maya's memory, fragments of old case files rose like ghosts. People gone after one night. Reports closed with a single cold line. No foul play suspected. Davies looked around, his eyes steady, unblinking. That was the danger. Not fear, but a chill so deep it felt inhuman. Maya didn't respond. She didn't need to shout. She knew her reaction was exactly what they were waiting to twist into an excuse. She only tilted her head, letting her gaze slide to Diaz. The young officer stood in the corner, her face drained of color, eyes wide as if staring at a pit opening beneath her feet. In that moment, Maya didn't see a rookie cop. She saw herself years ago, a soul standing before a choice. Stay silent and die inside, or speak and risk everything. Yes, Diaz, you've seen it now. You can't unsee it. The only question is, which side will you choose? The wheel of fate was already turning, grinding down whoever was too weak to step clear. Miller and O'Connell dragged Maya down the back hallway of the station. It was a passage rarely used, the concrete walls gray and damp, fluorescent lights flickering like the heartbeat of a dying man. The air smelled of mold and old cigarettes, a stale fog that clung to the skin. They chose this route because there were no cameras here. It was a corridor built for silence, a stage for stories that never reached daylight, a place where truth was smothered before it could breathe. Maya slowed her steps. She didn't resist, didn't thrash. She stopped altogether, forcing Miller to yank her arm. But in that instant, her voice cut through the narrow hall, clear and sharp as a blade slicing the quiet. Officer Diaz, turn on your body cam. Record this. The words fell heavy, echoing against the walls. Diaz froze, her hand stiff on her belt. Miller's face twisted. O'Connell shot Maya a look full of venom, and the air itself seemed to listen. Maya went on, her tone steady, measured, like she was reciting an oath. I am Federal Agent Maya Lincoln. I am being forced against my will by Detective Miller and Sergeant O'Connell to be moved to an undisclosed location in direct violation of federal custody procedures. I have reason to believe my life is in danger. The words weren't just words anymore. They were living evidence. A lawful bullet aimed straight at the men holding power. O'Connell lunged to silence her, but it was too late. Once spoken, no one could lock the words back up. In that moment, Miller clenched his teeth. Diaz trembled, and Maya knew. Sometimes a single sentence at the right time can turn an entire board upside down. "Shut up," O'Connell barked, shoving her hard. Maya staggered, but before he could press further, Diaz stepped forward too quickly, trying to regain balance, and in the stumble she accidentally collided with him. The evidence bag slipped from O'Connell's hand. It hit the ground, spilling across the floor. Keys, loose papers, and one small piece of metal. The sound rang out, sharp, metallic, a badge, gleaming gold under the flickering light. FBI. Unmistakable. Everything stopped. Miller bent down, his face tightening before he plastered on a forced grin. O'Connell swore under his breath, crouching to snatch it up, but Diaz's eyes were fixed on it, strung taut like a wire ready to snap. Maya stayed silent. She didn't need to say a word. She simply stood there, letting the truth speak louder than any defense could. In her mind, the thought was cold and clear. The play is over. And their masks just fell, right in front of the only witness they couldn't control. Coincidence. Dovate had dropped that badge into the open, and Maya knew, sometimes chance itself becomes the strongest ally. Davies arrived then, his face pale but his voice still smooth, wrapped in velvet. "Take her to the phone room. Let her make her call." Miller's jaw dropped, but Davies didn't even glance at him. That calm tone was commanding enough. They led Maya into a small, airless room, a wooden chair, a scarred table, and a black rotary phone with its coiled cord. No windows. The damp stench made it feel like the room had never once breathed. Miller leaned against the doorframe, eyes sharp like a caged animal. O'Connell folded his arms, chin jutted forward in defiance. Diaz stood behind, her shoulders trembling. Maya sat, cuffs still tight on her wrists, but her voice was solid as steel. "I want my phone call, now." Davies nodded once. One call. She dialed a long sequence, numbers etched into her memory like code burned onto skin. One ring. A hoarse but firm male voice answered. "This is Nightingale." Maya spoke crisply. "The cage is open." "Repeat, the cage is open. Request cleanup." She hung up without another word. Miller pushed forward, voice low, tense. "Who the hell did you just call?" Maya lifted her eyes, cold and unwavering, the ghost of a smile tugging her lips. That wasn't a call for help. That was a signal to strike. The room stiffened. Davies' brow furrowed. Diaz turned her face away, lips pressed tight. But Maya's pulse held steady. She knew the board had flipped, and the men who thought they were kings had already played their last pawn. 2 minutes later, the wail of sirens shook the building. Not a fire alarm, not a drill, full-force incursion. The crash of the front doors being blown open split the air. Black-clad figures surged inside, the word FBI blazing white on their backs. Their voices thundered, "FBI! Everyone freeze!" Local officers froze mid-step, some raising their hands, others shrinking back into corners. The station trembled like a stage stripped of its curtains, exposing the raw set beneath. No more sneers, no more jeers, only truth, storming through like a flood that swept away houses made of straw. Davies emerged, still composed, still trying to wear calm like armor. But before a word left his lips, 2 agents slammed him to the ground, cuffs biting into his wrists. Miller and O'Connell were shoved against the wall, nowhere left to run. And through the chaos walked a tall figure, Assistant Director Thorne. His eyes swept the room, then locked on Maya. She stood in the middle of the storm, wrists still shackled, but her chin lifted, her gaze blazing. "Agent Lincoln," Thorne said, his voice steady and deep. "Report." Maya stepped forward, the cuffs clattering uselessly, now a joke against her stance. She spoke slowly, each word weighted by the night that had brought her here. "Operation Blue Viper is complete, sir, and we have everything we need." There was no gavel, but truth itself had just been declared. And from that moment, the blue wall they thought unbreakable bore cracks that would never mend. Dawn crept in slowly. After a night of rain and biting wind, the city wore a thin veil of mist, as if hesitant to face a new day. Maya sat in the high-rise conference room of federal headquarters, her dark coat draped loosely over her narrow shoulders. On the table lay freshly printed files, thick stacks inked with names, badge numbers, and the evidence seized in the night. Assistant Director Thorne's voice carried evenly as he recounted the success of Operation Blue Viper. A network of corrupt officers, local officials on payroll, chains of money laundering that stretched across state lines. Piece by piece, the vast mosaic appeared, and it all traced back to one night's noise complaint search. But Maya didn't hear it all. Her ears caught the words, yet her mind wandered elsewhere. She remembered the metallic clang of the badge hitting the floor. Such a small sound, yet it was the moment the tide turned. Perhaps truth always begins with something small, and anyone who dismisses those small details will eventually lose. Thorne closed with a single acknowledgement. This operation will be remembered in the Bureau's history. And you, Agent Lincoln, were the deciding factor. Maya lifted her head. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She only gave a slight nod. Deep inside, she knew history wasn't written in reports. It was written in blood, in loss, and in memories no one wanted to revisit. In the stillness, Maya's thoughts slipped back 10 years. A small street in the south side, slick with rain that night too. Jamal, her younger brother, fell onto the pavement, his wide eyes frozen in terror. The police report said, "Accident during pursuit." 4 words stamped at the end. No foul play suspected. Each word carved into her like a knife. She had been 25, fresh out of law school, clinging to the Constitution as if it were breath itself. But the night Jamal died, she realized the Constitution could not protect anyone on its own. Men could twist it with a few strokes of a pen, bury truth under paper. From that night forward, she made her choice. Stay silent and die slowly, or step into fire. She stepped in, and once inside, there was no way back. Maya inhaled deeply. The wound never healed, but it became her engine, the rhythm that kept her standing. Jamal would never return, but each time she fought, she felt she was keeping his death from being erased. That was the only promise she still could keep. That afternoon, Maya stood behind a podium. Bright studio lights glared into her eyes, hot enough to sting. Below her waited hundreds of reporters, community leaders, and families of victims who had remained voiceless for years. She didn't begin with statistics or files or charts. She began with a single question. How many of you in this room have ever heard the words, "No foul play suspected"? A murmur rippled. A few hands rose. Many eyes fell to the floor. Maya gave a slow nod. Last night, we dismantled a ring of corruption embedded in the system. But don't call this a victory. It's only a step. Justice isn't something you display. It's something you maintain every day in every small decision. Her voice didn't tremble, didn't soar. It was steady, resonant, like a song that needed no accompaniment, like a nightingale's note in a gray square. She ended with one line. Truth never dies. It only waits for someone brave enough to speak it. For a moment, silence. Then applause thundered, long and relentless. Yet Maya knew the sound wasn't for her. It was for every Jamal who had never been acknowledged, for every name buried in reports. Among the crowd was Diaz. She wore plain clothes, her hair tied back, her young face looking different from the night before. Still nervous, but with the tremor of someone about to step across a threshold. By late afternoon in a temporary office, Diaz pressed her pen to paper. Blue ink wavered with her hand, but the letters came out clear. Each line of her statement was a cut into the blue wall she had once leaned on. "Are you sure?" a colleague asked softly. Diaz drew a breath. "If I wasn't sure, I'd already be dead from yesterday." Maya watched from a distance, a flicker of trust stirring in her chest. No one had forced Diaz to choose this path, but she had chosen it. And sometimes, one young person's step into the light is enough to show the way for an entire generation. Night fell. Maya returned to her apartment. The door had been replaced, but scratches on the floorboards remained, reminders that darkness had once claimed the space. She laid her hand on the table, where the small notebook still rested, its cover scuffed from the chaos. The room was silent. But this silence felt different now, not a weight, but peace after a storm. Maya walked to the window and pulled the curtain wide. The city's light poured in, golden and sprawling like new paint spilling across canvas. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she thought she heard Jamal calling her name. Not sorrowful, just reminding. She smiled. Then opened her eyes. Tomorrow would come again. And when it did, justice, slow, fragile, imperfect, would still need a voice strong enough to shatter silence. Maya's story reminds us that justice is not always handed down from above. It must be claimed by those willing to guard the truth. Sometimes, a single voice, a single small act, is enough to shake the walls of power that seem unbreakable. And if you have ever seen injustice, if you have ever watched truth buried, remember this: truth never dies. It only waits for someone brave enough to speak it. If this story touched you, Leave a like, share it so more people can hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to Talk Story, because some stories are too important for silence.